Hello, I'm LisaKay,
And I'm Taylor Cole-Longacre.
and this is Intentional Talk, a show that cares and brings positives to the air.
Okay, I'm so excited because with us today is one of my favorite people, Sherry James, program management professional. She's the developer and coach of other servant leaders, and servant leader is one of the best ways to describe Sherry.
Yep.
In 2019, she created a nonprofit organization, 2020 Lives Changed, Inc., to allow the world to benefit from speaking engagements through Phoenix Speaks. She has a very personal story about how mental health has impacted her family, but she also is giving hope through the way that she shares inspiration and her encouragement with the world. Welcome our friend, Sherry James.
Yes, welcome, Sherry.
PMP, yes.
Pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. These women are amazing. So I am literally surrounded by this angelic presence. So it's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. Thanks for having me.
Yes,
our pleasure.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Well, let's delve right into 2020 Lives Changed. And you have an updated vision to that organization. I know you and I spoke about this.
Yes.
What was it? Back in
February of last year?
February of 2020?
2020.
Okay,
Yeah.
February 2020. You and I spoke and you said, I've got hashtag 2020 Lives Changed.
Yeah.
You came to be on my show, SpeakUP, and we were talking about how this movement was going to change so many more people than 2020.
Oh my gosh. Yes, it was an amazing opportunity. And so thank you again for that chance to be, on stage and to speak up and talk about the importance of mental health and mental wellness. And I remember after the show, I was proud. I was like, yes, we're going to touch 2020 lives in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And Taylor's face, she's like, this is going to be live on Amazon Prime, right? Like you're going to touch way more than 2020 lives. And I had to kind of reconsider that. I'm like, yeah, wow, maybe I had a dream that was too small, right? And so who knew that the year would end up being what it was? It ended up touching every life.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the good news, right? The good news is that I had a goal to touch 2020 lives. We did that by February 15th, I think, based on the engagements from Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
And God had something so much bigger for me than what I even imagined, because the updated vision statement is that all lives changed in 2020.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So the message is, again, I had a small dream and God's like, oh, that's cute. That's adorable. But you've got a much bigger audience who needs to hear this message. So I thank you both for, both Speak Up and the opportunity to speak at Fellowship Power Lunch. That was so
wonderful.
it was a very refreshing opportunity to just share my testimony.
Yes.
And so, again, I'm surrounded by some amazing women of God, and I'm grateful to be here today. So
thank you.
We're
for being
grateful
here.
too. Most definitely. So, Sherry, how has the vision and the mission changed the post-pandemic?
Yeah. So, initially, because for those that don't know, my father was an Air Force veteran who committed suicide when I was very young. I was 7 years old, and my mom found him. She never recovered, right? And so, and honestly, nor did I, in hindsight. So, I imagined that my work would be very specific to veterans families, people who are in the military currently serving or have served before. Kind of that was where my passion was initially, right? And so I have an amazing team that's been there to support me since day one so that we can do this work. The pandemic did offer a bit of a shift for us, because having a smaller demographic makes sense when you're doing a startup nonprofit. You don't want to try to eat the whole elephant, right? You want to just one bite at a time. Yeah. So the paradigm shift we had to go to is, instead of slowly ramping up from a small group to larger groups and larger areas, we had to kind of say, what do we do to make sure that this message is heard globally right now, right? And so it was very interesting how everyone was ready. The team was like, we got it. We can just do an Instagram live show every week, right? And you don't have to be, a part of an organization, you can just listen and we'll give feedback. We gave different modalities of mental health and wellness, right? I got to interview people who had different therapy, styles. And so it was very interesting. We went from just like, okay, we're only going to talk to people who've been impacted around, military service and veterans. And then we had to step back and go, you know what, this message is for everyone.
It's bigger.
And whoever can benefit from it.
It's got to be bigger now.
Oh my gosh.
With COVID and, families being locked up and, some more worried or scared than others, that you're probably seeing an increase of it.
Yeah, and we talked about that a little bit before the show. The numbers, when we talk about faith, right? So I wanted to change 2020 lives and make sure that we started to lower the number of suicides. But with COVID, the numbers increased.
They did, sadly. The numbers of suicides increased during COVID.
Yeah.
And are there factors? Are there things that we can point to that
absolutely.
The isolation?
Yeah. So it's interesting that I think a lot of people imagine that it is the isolation, right? So it's the first thing you think about, like, oh, we don't get to hug on each other like we used to. I'm a big hugger. You remember that, right?
I am too.
I miss the hugs. But there's even more to that, just the dynamic of the household changing. So if you think about families, just a family with children, maybe the husband went out and traveled all the time. So he was typically gone. The mother had a routine and a rhythm, get the children dressed, get them out to school, whatever, or vice versa from a role, perspective. But now you put everyone in a home together and you've got couples and families who've never really spent all day together, right? The added responsibility as a parent to now teach, right? Which we are not all capable and we're not all skilled as teachers, right? There's a reason people choose that profession. They are also angels, obviously, but that adds a lot of stress. Just having to have everyone around you all the time, and the lack of isolation. People think that one of the reasons for the mental illness spikes is that we are not able to see our friends and see our families, which is true. But I think my perspective and my research is showing that a lot of it is because we're not used to having everyone in the house all day at the same time, right? Yes. And dealing with the stressors of, do I understand 7th grade math? I don't, just so we're clear, because my son is bringing me, work, like, can you help me with this? And I feel like an idiot, right? I'm like, why are you drawing boxes and charts? Just put the numbers one on top of each other, draw a line. And he's like, that's not how it works.
That's not how we do math anymore.
Right, it's not how we do math.
Yeah.
And so if you imagine the mental impact that would have on someone who's, a corporate professional, and we're managing multi-billion-dollar budgets, but I don't understand 7th grade math.
I don't understand it. Yeah.
Right? So it's a lot more. It's a lot more complicated than just the isolation. It's the change of dynamics in the household. There's the fear of losing your job. Even if you still are working, there is that concern, right? Mm-hmm. Because businesses are changing.
Yeah.
And so there's that added worry and stress of like, will I still be able to provide for my family? Or if you've lost your job, right? And now how will I support my family? What do we need to do without? But I will say that there's a bright side.
Yes.
That what people are also finding is the opportunity to renew themselves, right? So if I was, I don't know, a donut maker beforehand, and that's all I've ever done, right? Let's say that was my role. This pandemic has given people the opportunity to have conversations about what inspires them. Like, maybe I don't want to be a donut maker anymore. And, the donut shop is closed. Mm-hmm. So now I have the opportunity to reimagine myself and reinvent myself. Yeah. And so there are good things as well. I'm hoping that we can use our platforms to remind people of the good things that are happening, right?
Yes.
This can be a renaissance period for people who are creatives and artists, creators of content, as opposed to just constantly consuming.
Yes.
So there's good things in it as well.
There are. Turning off the TV.
Oh my gosh.
Create.
Yeah.
I love what you said about renaissance, because this has been that opportunity for all of us. Frankly, intentional talk.
You stole my next thing to say.
All right. You can have it back. Take it back.
Go for it, girl. Go for it.
But really, intentional talk birthed out of this time in the pandemic where we were thinking of what to do. Of course, you had this vision a long time ago, and I was like, what?
But we did. We launched in July of 2020.
Yes, July of 2020.
Wanting to put positives on the air because there were so many negative
Absolutely.
negative
Too many negative
stations.
things.
Yeah, that we created intentional talks. So.
And I love the title too, because we have to be intentional about choosing the positive input, right? So it's so easy to get caught up in just scrolling through our phones and looking at all of the things that are happening now around the world. And no matter how your algorithm and your app is set up, you are going to be inundated with negative information constantly. So we've got to be intentional. You have to choose to go, you know what, I'm going to check, mail or do this in the first thing in the morning and the last thing at night, but not throughout the day. Like I will, make sure that my focus is intentional and positive and
purposeful.
Yes, that's perfect. That's a perfect word. Yeah,
that is a great word. Absolutely. Yes.
So, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you've got a great question. Keep it going, because I already stole the other one from you, right? We've got to share.
Yes, we do. So, what is the motivation from Phoenix Speaks Incorporated 2020 and Lives Changed Incorporated does every day?
So, last year was, and this is kind of a personal moment, right, about kind of why I do what I do. I was diagnosed in January of last year with PTSD.
Okay.
And so, beforehand, my motivation obviously was help other people and have conversations about mental health, which means there's a level of healing out loud that's necessary, right? I can't talk about how important mental health is to other people if I'm not sharing kind of my own personal dealing with it and struggle, right?
That's a lot of vulnerability. And were you ready, even though this is what you do, were you actually ready, Sherry, to say, okay, I've got this diagnosis, and so I'm just going to step out and speak up about it? What does that look like?
So no. I was not ready. I wasn't ready for that. But I will tell you that I am so grateful to be surrounded by the kinds of people that will remind me of the things that I've told the people that I've coached my whole life, right? They remind me, like, remember what you said to me about, there's nothing wrong with not being okay as long as you're on your way to being okay, right?
Yeah.
So having those kinds of conversations with the people who are in my tribe, they're like, you know what? Like, let's do it. This is how I lead. I lead by this servant leadership mentality. I'm here to help you. I'm here to help remove whatever obstacles are in your way. And the biggest obstacle right now about mental health is the fact that no one wants to talk about it. No one wants to be vulnerable enough or open enough to say, I'm struggling, right? We want to see every picture of me on Instagram is smiling. And no, there are days that are very tough. There are days that I can't get out of bed. There are days that no matter how amazing my life is, that I am still sad. And so we talked about this a little bit before the show. My motivation is hearing from people every day, from social media platforms, my LinkedIn network, friends and family, and people are just, they're opening up and they're like, hey, here's what's happening in my life. And I'm not a counselor or a therapist. Luckily, my business partner, Dr. Stacia Alexander, she provides that kind of that grounding from a clinical perspective. But the motivation is to show people that there are so many resources available that weren't available to my parents, that weren't available to me when I was growing up. And so we just want to be a conduit of how do we get to, we had someone on the show last year that does equine therapy. Like, no matter how stressed out you are in the presence of a horse.
Now, some people don't know what that is. I certainly.
Horse therapy.
It's
okay.
Thank you for
There
that.
you go.
Yeah. And so there's so many ways to handle, the stresses that the world is throwing at us.
Yeah.
Yoga. There's an organization from a young lady in California, and she focuses on veterans and healing through PTSD with yoga and meditation and help. So there's just so many more resources available.
There are. But Sherry, is there, say, one or two things that people should consider? Is there a question we can ask? Is there a question we can ask ourselves? Because I've known you for a while, and to say that you've come to the realization or you got the diagnosis of PTSD, I'm surprised. Because you've been ingrained in the mental health field and in helping people. Is there something that we could ask ourselves? There's something that we can ask a loved one who we think they might be impacted by mental illness?
Yeah. So I want to first normalize the conversation, right? And so even if a person is not diagnosed, if they don't show signs, we are all struggling, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a blessing and a curse. The blessing is that every interaction that we have with people, whether it's a loved one, whether it's a stranger, we really, for the first time in any of our lives, are all struggling at some level, right? So it's, my feedback is always, what can we do to change ourselves? Because that then is a ripple effect. And the people that see us will go, oh my gosh, every time I see her, she is, she's still graceful and she's still thoughtful. Now I have to have conversations, and I have an accountability group that we have. We have a question that we ask, and the question is, how are you really? Because we do this like conversationally. How are you? And you're like, oh, I'm fine. How are you?
I'm fine. Yeah. Rainbows and cupcakes.
And sometimes you just got to take a second and stop, and you're like, okay, but how are you really? And you will notice that a person's body language will like just kind of.
They can really talk about it.
Take down the guard and all of the stuff.
Yeah,
you
and
got
the face and the mask.
Yeah.
And so it's very simple. Just like kind of, how are you really? And then listen. And so what we like to do is converse. We want to have a conversation, and it's not about that. Sometimes it's like, just ask and listen. You don't have to solve. You don't have to come up with a solution. You don't have to offer.
Most people feel they do.
We feel compelled. Like we are not God. Right?
Yeah.
And if I know specifically how I can pray for you, if I know specifically how I can, if you just feel overwhelmed, maybe I will just offer this, or I'll just send you food, right? You didn't ask for it because you didn't, but I will just go, you know what? Dinner's on me tonight, right? So that question is probably the easiest way to just kind of, find out if people are okay. There are so many resources available, like, the National Association of Mental Illness.
Okay.
They have a list of questions that you can ask, but you want to make sure that you don't make it uncomfortable, right?
Yes, because it's very, we talked earlier about it being a judgmental type conversation is, well, why don't you just get well? Well, why don't you just go do something fun, do something that you love, or you have so much to be grateful for. Why is it that you're not well?
Yeah. And we've got to be very careful with that. And I found out about that, ironically, the first time when I went to speak to my son's school, I guess December of 2019. So this is pre-COVID. And one of the students, these are 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And I talked about my book, and I talked about suicide prevention. And I expected them to not really engage back, though I facilitate conversations, I give them activities to work together. But to hear these children, and this is in Frisco ISD, right? And so to hear the stress that these children are under just from school, and this was pre-COVID, so this is just regular middle school. And I remember a young lady she sat in the front of the class, and she said, Miss Sherry, my parents believe because they grew up in a very poor area that was very overpopulated, that I should be happy because we live in Frisco and I have nice things and I have a big room and I have all of these things, but I'm not happy, and so that means I must be broken. And I almost broke into tears in front of these children because I did that. I do that still with my children, right?
We think, yes. Look, like, comparing it to something else and saying you should be grateful for what you have.
I believe the suicide rate is higher in teens.
Absolutely.
Than it is anywhere.
Actually starting from age 8 at this point. Yeah. So if you think about the access to information that our children have, the fact that they are 100% of screen time for the most part. They're in front of a screen all day. So the messages, that same negative messages that we are being inundated with, so are they, without that full frontal lobe being processed for them to be able to understand and siphon out what's negative and what's not good for me. It's just a constant onslaught of negativity. And then we're giving them more of that as parents and teachers and coaches because we're like, why are you sad? And so the second tip is like, imagine if someone in your family or your loved one was sick, right? If they had, had cancer, you wouldn't ask a person, why do you have cancer? Why? It's an illness. And so you don't expect people with typical diseases that you can see or disabilities that you can see. You don't ask them just get better. You have a nice house. You should not feel You shouldn't be diabetic, right?
Mental illness is a
an
tangible
illness. It's
illness.
an actual illness.
Mhm.
And so I think just that thought process of, how are you really, right? And how can I help? Because in that, I think you gave us an example earlier, and you're
Mhm.
like, I wondered, like,
What I could have done.
what I could have done,
Or picked up on.
but we can't, right? And
Yeah.
it's not something that if someone has made up their mind, more often than not, there's nothing we can do in that moment. What we can do every day, as just a part of our normal day to day, is if you don't have the opportunity to receive the answer, don't ask how a person is doing.
Really?
So from my, and this is my own personal experience.
Okay.
Wow.
If you're like, hey Sherry, how are you doing today? And you're walking on your way to a meeting, and I can tell by your body language that I'm not going to tell you how I'm doing, because I perceive that you don't even really have time for my answer. So now I'm obligated to say, oh, I'm great, thanks.
Yeah. Normally
no.
it's just a habit to
It's a
ask, how are
habit.
you
It's
doing?
a
Absolutely.
habit.
And
But for that person who's suffering from mental illness, now
that's one more reason.
another reason they didn't get that outlet.
Mhm.
They saw someone who they loved and possibly trusted,
Yeah.
but they weren't able to share what
Mhm.
was deep in their heart and what was burdening them so much.
Yeah.
Oh
And
my
it's a lot, and I don't want it to be a negative thing. It's just one of those small changes in behavior
Yeah.
that we can do every day, just as humans, right? To just go,
Yes.
if I ask you how you are, I want to have the time to receive that. And it may take 10 minutes, and it might take 20 minutes. I've got to be open and available, because maybe then the conversation changes, right? So
Oh, we have got to change our small talk language. I would love, and this is intentional talk, right? So I would love for us to find another way to have small talk, and that how are you, realize the weight and the magnitude
It's
of
heavy.
those words.
Yeah.
They really
then-
are heavy.
wow.
yeah, when you think about it, then I
Yeah.
feel like I've got to determine, can I really tell Taylor?
Can you really?
Can I really tell you in
Open
the
up.
7 seconds that you've given me to? I can't.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, just being cognizant of what we're asking. And when we ask, be in an environment where we can receive the response, because then the conversation gets deeper, it becomes more transparent. And then maybe, and then it's just like, well, how can I help? Right.
Yes.
Or here's what I can do to help.
Yeah. One thing I've experienced when it comes to children is that I volunteer for the Frisco Detention Center, and before COVID, and we actually were trying to walk into the COVID issue, but they shut it down. But I'll tell you that when you do meet one-on-one with the teenagers you're assigned, and just allow them to talk about what's going on in their household, and not be judgmental about it, but let them know that you are a friend. It's amazing what it'll do for them. So
Yeah, that lack of judgment, and we don't know that we're
Yes.
doing it, right?
Yeah,
It just
we
we
don't
don't
know.
know.
We don't know.
We're doing it in the best. But yeah, no, that's very good. Like having that one-on-one conversation, and it's a phone call. It's not necessarily a direct message on Instagram.
Oh, yes.
It's a good time to talk about talking to people, actually having a phone call or a FaceTime conversation.
And being present. I
Yeah.
think that is so underrated. As we say, be present, but
Yeah.
that looks a lot different being present and available to receive an answer
Mhm.
than to simply, hey, how you doing?
Yeah.
And, oh, good to see you. I say
Well-
that all the time. I have to take full responsibility
We
for
all
my
do.
quickness and
Mhm.
not having that time to really take it in and be present. And I think we all know people who are good at being present.
Mhm.
I mean, you, for example, Sherry, the times that I've needed to say something to you and you're like, let's just take the time.
Mhm.
I'm right here.
Yeah.
And I'm like, where does she get that? Where does she get that? And I truly believe you because you're like, I'm not going anywhere.
Right.
I am here. You don't see my phones around me. You don't see me looking at screens. I'm right here.
Mhm.
I'm like, okay, this is a safe place.
Yes.
yeah.
So you are definitely in the
Exactly.
right field.
Exactly.
Thank
You are
you.
doing the
Yeah.
right thing.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's easier when you realize, when you can just stop and have those conversations with yourself. Like, do I have time to engage? And when you do it, right? Like you're like, I got 10 extra minutes. I'm gonna walk by and just check on
Yeah.
LisaKay, and just see how she's doing. So
A question for the audience would be, since COVID, how many of your close friends that you've known for years have you literally picked up the phone, scheduling enough time, 30 minutes or an hour, knowing that if you get that special person on the line, that you really want to know, how are you doing? How's COVID? How are you transitioning through this COVID thing? How can I help? I have done that every month and will continue to do that. And it's just
I
amazing.
love it.
And
I love
it not only warms your soul, but they're surprised and they're feeling more loved by it. So
Yes. I have a list of people that I try to follow up with, and
Yeah.
I just kind of mark them off, and I'm like, okay, have I touched base with that individual in the
Yeah.
past 90 days or so? And if I haven't, I'm like, okay, it's time to reach out. Another friend of mine said the birthday check-in is good, but you check in a month after their birthday. So you might say happy birthday,
Yeah.
but then a month later, after all of the
All
gifts and the
that,
cake and the flowers are gone, checking in with that individual, because it's telling when you go back and you look at your cell phone and you look at when is the last time that I communicated with or texted that person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, it's been a while. It's been too long.
Yeah.
Well, and really quickly, I want to add, I know we're running out of time, but I do want to add this final tip. We're busy. So back to the point I made earlier, we're teaching our children and we've got, whatever. It doesn't always have to be a half hour dedicated. I will text, I am thankful for you. Like I will just, it's one text,
Yeah.
right? Or I'm grateful to have you in my life and
There
or
you
I
go.
love you, right? Just, I don't want anything. I don't need anything. You don't have to call me back. I just want to let you know I love you. And so that's quicker, right? That's something that I can do very quickly to let people know that they're on my mind, they're on my heart. I don't have time to engage in a conversation,
Very
but I
nice.
want to let you know that I love you. So
Oh, that's so
Thinking
nice.
about you.
it's important.
So we have to have that commitment, and accountability partners is something you mentioned earlier. We can all hold one another accountable for being present and taking that time
Absolutely.
to ask those questions. Well, this has been really helpful.
Yeah.
And it's got LisaKay in tears and pretty much me
Good
too.
tears. They're good tears.
Very timely, because these conversations about mental illness, about how we can step in, stand in the gap for someone who may be in need, is so important. I know you're a woman of faith. Can you tell us briefly what faith means to you, or how your faith plays a role in the work that you do every
Absolutely.
day?
Absolutely. I want to stress that question resonates with me so deeply because I'm not working. I'm living in my purpose, and I have never felt as rewarded. And I've had some amazing salaried positions and jobs and titles. There is nothing like waking up in the morning knowing that you are doing God's work.
Yeah.
Amen.
It just changes. So your faith looks like gratitude. My faith is, I woke up today. So that means at least one person will be touched by something that I say. And so it flips. Faith for me is living on purpose. It's no apologies. There's no wondering, why am I here? I know God has proven to me that this is the work that he's created for me to do. So even when I look back in my therapy sessions on the trauma that I've experienced, I had to go through that in order to be able to appreciate the peace that I have in my spirit today. Yeah. So faith looks like trusting God in every single thing that happens in my life, whether it's the fact that I'm single, right? Like, I'm like, wait, God, are you ready? I'm ready. You can send him to me, And he's like, you're a little busy right now, right? So faith looks like understanding God's promise and, imagining that he knows what he's doing.
Absolutely.
And that exactly where I am is exactly where I'm supposed to be. It changes your outlook. Even when things are falling apart and everything looks terrible, I know that I'm living in my purpose. And so my faith will get me through the dark days and the tough days and the days when I can't put on makeup or clothes, right? The faith keeps me focused on helping others because someone needs to hear how I made it through that one day, right? Or that 1 week or that 1 year. So
yeah, it's your story
This is great.
to share.
and it's right.
It's your
key.
story.
And it's my story to share. That's important.
Thank you so much for joining us today for Intentional Talk with LisaKay and Taylor. And thank you to our lovely guest, Sharon James, PMP. This has been a great conversation and one that we needed to have. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.